The late afternoon sun hung low over Masonville, Mississippi, casting a golden haze across the quiet streets as Amara Johnson, a 16-year-old with a bright smile and a quick wit, walked home from drama club. Her backpack bounced lightly against her shoulders, stuffed with scripts and a worn copy of A Raisin in the Sun, her favorite play. She hummed softly, her sneakers crunching against the gravel path that cut through the woods near Creek Road, a shortcut she'd taken countless times since she was a kid. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the faint rustle of leaves blended with the distant chirping of birds. Amara's thoughts were on the upcoming school production. She'd landed the lead role, and her drama teacher, Ms. Carter, had said her audition was electric. The thought made her chest swell with pride, a rare feeling in a town where she often felt like she had to prove herself twice over. Masonville wasn't openly hostile, not always, but it had a way of reminding her she was different. The stares at the grocery store, the whispers when she walked into the diner, the way certain teachers seemed surprised she aced their tests, it all added up. Still, Amara kept her head high, just like her mom, Grace, always told her, "You're not here to shrink, baby. You're here to shine." Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She pulled it out, smiling at a text from her mom. "Proud of you, sweetheart. Dinner's waiting, your favorite smothered chicken." Amara typed a quick reply. "Be home soon, Mama," and slid the phone back into her jeans. The path curved around a cluster of tall oaks, their branches knitting together to form a canopy that dappled the ground with shadows. She adjusted her backpack, her steps quickening as the light faded. The woods were familiar, but something felt off tonight. The birds had gone quiet, and the air seemed heavier, like it was holding its breath. A twig snapped behind her, sharp and deliberate. Amara froze, her heart kicking up a notch. She glanced over her shoulder, but the path was empty, just shadows and swaying branches. "Probably a deer," she muttered to herself, trying to shake the unease. She'd walked this path 100 times. Nothing ever happened in Masonville. But her mom's voice echoed in her mind. "Trust your gut, Amara." She picked up her pace, her sneakers slapping the dirt harder now. Another snap, closer this time, followed by a low chuckle that sent a chill down her spine. Amara's hands curled into fists as she turned her eyes, scanning the trees. 3 figures stepped out from the shadows, their faces half hidden by the fading light. She recognized them instantly: Ethan Boyd, Mason, Mellilin, and Tucker Lattimore. The sons of Masonville's most powerful men, the sheriff, the judge, and the hardware store magnate. They were seniors at her school, football players with broad shoulders and a reputation for getting away with anything. Ethan, the sheriff's son, led the trio, his smirk sharp as a blade. "Well, look who's out here all alone," he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Little Miss Actress, thinking she's too good for Masonville." Amara's mouth went dry, but she squared her shoulders, keeping her voice steady. "I'm just going home, Ethan. Leave me alone." Tucker laughed, circling to her left, his boots crunching deliberately. "Your kind don't belong on this path," he said, his tone casual but laced with venom. Mason, quieter than the others, hung back his eyes, darting nervously, but he didn't stop them. Amara's heart pounded, but she refused to show fear. She took a step back, her mind racing through her options. The main road was too far to run, and the woods were too dense to escape through. These boys were bigger, stronger, and they knew it. "This is public land," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "I have every right to be here." Ethan's smirk widened as he pulled something from his pocket, a folded white cloth that made Amara's stomach lurch. "Everything in Masonville belongs to someone," he said, stepping closer. "And you need to learn your place." The words hit like a slap, but it was the cloth in his hand that froze her blood. She'd seen pictures in history books, heard stories from her grandparents about what those white hoods meant. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket, probably her mom checking in, but she couldn't reach for it now. Her eyes flicked between the three boys, now forming a loose triangle around her. "Last chance," Ethan said, unfolding the cloth into a makeshift hood. "Come quiet, or we make this hard." The woods seemed to close in the shadows, swallowing what little light remained. Amara's instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs felt rooted to the ground. She thought of her dad, Nathan, a man she hadn't seen in months because of his work. He'd always told her, "If you're ever in trouble, stand tall and think clear." But standing tall against 3 football players, one of them possibly armed, was a different kind of trouble. Before she could decide, Ethan lunged his hand, grabbing for her arm. Amara twisted away, her drama club agility kicking in, but Tucker was faster, his thick arms wrapping around her from behind. She thrashed, kicking at his shins, but his grip tightened, squeezing the air from her lungs. "Stop fighting!" he growled, dragging her off the path toward a clearing. Mason hesitated, muttering something about going too far, but Ethan silenced him with a glare. "You in or out, Mlelin?" he snapped. Mason fell silent, following them. They threw Amara to the ground in the clearing, her knees hitting the dirt hard. Ethan pulled the hood over his face, the others following suit. The sight of those white cloths, crude but unmistakable, made her heart race with a mix of fear and anger. "This is our town," Ethan said, his voice muffled but cruel. "And you don't belong." A fist connected with her shoulder, knocking her sideways. Pain flared, but she curled into a ball, protecting her face, as her dad had once shown her. Another blow landed on her back, then her ribs. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood. Through the haze of pain she heard their taunts, words she'd heard whispered before, but never so openly. Tucker grabbed her backpack, dumping its contents onto the ground, her scripts, her phone, her notebook, and stomped on them, laughing. "Look at this," he sneered, kicking her phone into the dirt. "Think you're so smart." Ethan knelt beside her, his breath hot against her ear. "This is what happens when you forget your place." They didn't stop there. Ethan pulled out a lighter, and Amara's heart stopped as she saw a small pile of sticks arranged in the shape of a cross. The flames caught quickly, casting an orange glow across their masked faces. "Remember this," Ethan said, grabbing her hair to force her to look at the burning symbol. The crackle of the fire mixed with her ragged breathing as she fought to stay calm. Her dad's voice echoed again. "Stay sharp, Amara. Panic gets you nowhere." She clung to that thought, memorizing their voices, their movements, anything that might help later. Finally, they stepped back, satisfied with their work. "Don't tell anyone," Tucker warned, tossing her ruined backpack beside her, "or we'll come back." The boys disappeared into the woods, their laughter fading with the crunch of their footsteps. Amara lay there for what felt like hours, the cold seeping into her bones as the fire died out. Her body ached, but she forced herself to move, crawling toward the path. Her phone was cracked, but still worked. She typed a shaky message to her mom, "Help, woods." Then she collapsed, the stars above blurring through her tears. Headlights cut through the darkness, tires crunching on gravel. "Oh, Lord," a voice gasped. It was Mr. Jenkins, the old farmer who lived at the edge of the woods. His weathered hands were gentle as he helped her sit up. "Hold on, Amara. I'm calling your mama." Grace Johnson arrived minutes later, her nurse's scrubs still on from her shift at Masonville General. She knelt beside her daughter, tears streaming down her face, as she checked Amara's injuries. "You're gonna be okay, baby," she whispered, though her voice shook. The ambulance ride was a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices. At the hospital, doctors cleaned Amara's wounds, noting bruises on her ribs and shoulder, a split lip, and a swollen cheek. Grace stayed by her side, holding her hand, as the nurses took photos for the report. In the quiet of the hospital room, long after midnight, Grace dialed a number she rarely used. "Nathan," she said when the call connected, her voice breaking. "They hurt our baby." They hurt her bad. Somewhere across the country, in a nondescript motel room, Nathan Johnson listened in silence. A former Navy SEAL, he'd spent 2 decades moving through shadows, hunting enemies most people never knew existed. His last mission had ended just days ago, and he'd been planning to come home for good. Now, his wife's words turned his blood to ice. "I'm coming," he said, his voice low and steady, like the calm before a storm. He hung up, packed his duffel bag, and was on the road within 10 minutes. By dawn, Nathan's rental car, a plain gray sedan, rolled into Masonville. The town looked unchanged since he'd left years ago. Same faded storefronts, same Confederate statue in the town square, same air of quiet control held by a few powerful families. He drove past the sheriff's station, noting the patrol cars parked out front, then past the courthouse where Judge Mullen's name was etched on a brass plaque. His final stop was the Lucky Star Diner, a greasy spoon where the town's pulse could be felt over coffee and bacon. Nathan parked across the street, his dark jacket blending into the early morning shadows. Inside the diner smelled of burnt coffee and fried eggs, the clink of silverware mixing with low conversations. He slid into a booth near 2 older men, their flannel shirts and weathered faces marking them as locals. The waitress, a tired woman named Betty, poured his coffee without asking. "Menu," she said, already turning away. Nathan nodded, but his eyes were on the men in the next booth, their voices carrying just enough to hear. "You hear about that trouble out by Jenkins's farm," one said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Some girl got roughed up in the woods." The other man, Earl, chuckled darkly. "Yeah, heard it was the Johnson girl. Always thought she was too big for her britches, strutting around like she owns the place." Nathan's coffee sat untouched, steam curling upward. He kept his breathing steady, a habit from years of high-stakes missions. "Sheriff's boy was mixed up in it, I bet." Earl continued, lowering his voice. "Just like his daddy, back in the day. Gotta keep things in line, you know." The other man grunted. "Kids these days don't learn respect like we did. Sometimes they need a reminder." Nathan's hand tightened slightly on his mug, the only sign of the anger building inside him. He listened as they dropped names: Boyd, Mullen, Lattimore, casually weaving a web of power and prejudice that had held Masonville in its grip for generations. A young deputy walked in, nodding to the men. "Morning, Earl," he called. "Sheriff's got his hands full with this one, huh?" Earl grinned. "Nothing Boyd can't handle. Just a little dust-up, right?" The deputy shrugged. "Paperwork's a mess, but it'll blow over. Always does." Nathan stayed for an hour, his coffee growing cold as he memorized every detail, the names, the connections, the way the men spoke of the sheriff and judge like old friends. To anyone watching, he was just a stranger passing through, maybe a salesman or a truck driver. But his mind was working with the precision of a machine, mapping the town's power structure, identifying weak points, calculating his next move. When he finally stood, he left a crumpled $5 bill under his mug and walked out, the bell above the door chiming softly. Outside, the morning sun was climbing, painting Main Street in shades of gold and shadow. Nathan slid into his car, his face expressionless, but his eyes sharp with purpose. He drove to Masonville General Hospital, parking in the visitor lot. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he walked through the sliding doors, his boots silent on the polished floor. Grace met him in the hallway, her eyes red from crying, but her posture strong. She led him to Amara's room, where their daughter lay in a hospital bed, her face bruised but her eyes open and alert. "Dad," Amara whispered, her voice hoarse. Nathan knelt beside her, taking her hand gently. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly. "I'm here now." Grace stood by the window, arms crossed, watching them. "They burned across, Nathan," she said, her voice tight with anger. They wanted to scare her, to break her. Nathan's jaw tightened, but his expression remained calm. "Tell me everything," he said to Amara, his tone steady but firm. She recounted the attack, her voice trembling at first, but growing stronger as she described their faces, their words, the fire. "I knew who they were, even with the hoods," she said. Ethan's voice, Tucker's laugh. Mason just stood there, but he didn't stop them. Nathan listened, his face a mask of control, but inside a fire burned hotter than the one Amara had faced. He pulled out his phone, carefully photographing her injuries, the bruises, the cuts, the defensive marks on her arms. He noted the backpack, now bagged as evidence, its contents ruined, but still telling a story. "I'm sorry, Dad," Amara said, her voice breaking. "I tried to fight back, but you did nothing wrong." Nathan cut in, his voice firm but kind. "You survived. That's what matters. And now we're going to make this right." He stood, kissing her forehead before turning to Grace. "I'll be back soon," he said. "Keep her safe." Grace nodded, her eyes fierce. "Always." Nathan walked out of the hospital, the weight of his daughter's pain fueling his resolve. He wasn't just a father, now he was a soldier with a mission. Masonville's power structure had stood unchallenged for too long, but Nathan Johnson was back, and he wasn't here to negotiate. As he drove away, the morning light caught the edge of his small black notebook, tucked into his jacket pocket. Inside, he'd already written 3 names: Boyd, Llewellyn, Lattimore. The war had begun, and Masonville would never be the same. The morning sun climbed higher over Masonville, painting the town in shades of amber, as Nathan Johnson parked his nondescript gray sedan across from the Mason County Sheriff's Office. The squat brick building sat on Main Street, its tinted windows reflecting the early bustle of the town. Nathan adjusted his collared shirt, the kind that made him look like any other civilian, but his posture, straight, balanced, alert, betrayed the years of military training. He'd spent the night reviewing the photos of Amara's injuries, each bruise and cut searing into his memory like a mission brief. His daughter was stable, but the hospital's sterile walls couldn't erase the fear in her eyes, or the weight of her whispered apology. "I tried to fight back." Nathan's jaw tightened at the thought, but his face remained calm, a mask honed through decades of high-stakes operations. Today, he'd start dismantling the system that allowed 3 boys to attack his daughter and walk away unscathed. He stepped out of the car, his boots clicking softly on the pavement, and walked toward the sheriff's office with the steady gait of a man who knew exactly what he was walking into. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. The front desk deputy, a young man with a crew cut and a name tag reading Wilson, glanced up from his paperwork. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone more bored than curious. Nathan's voice was low, but carried an edge that made Wilson's pen pause. "I'm here to see Sheriff Boyd about my daughter's assault." Wilson's eyes flickered with recognition, and something else, discomfort, maybe fear. He picked up the desk phone, murmuring into it while stealing glances at Nathan. "Sheriff will see you now," he said finally. Down the hall, last door on the right. The hallway was lined with framed photos of Sheriff Darrell Boyd shaking hands at community events, posing with his son Ethan in a football uniform, accepting an award for keeping Masonville safe. Nathan noted each one, building a mental map of the man he was about to face. Boyd's office was cluttered, a massive oak desk dominating the space, littered with coffee cups and a half-eaten donut. The sheriff himself, a broad man, with a khaki uniform stretched tight across his chest, looked up as Nathan entered. "Mr. Johnson, I presume," Boyd said, his smile thin and insincere. "What brings you here?" Nathan remained standing, hands loose at his sides. "My daughter Amara was attacked in the woods yesterday. Beaten, terrorized, and targeted because of her race. I want to know what you're doing about it." Boyd leaned back, his chair creaking. "Heard about that. Unfortunate business. Kids get into scuffles sometimes. We're looking into it." His tone was dismissive, as if Amara's bruises were no more serious than a playground scrape. Nathan's voice stayed level, but his eyes locked onto Boyd's. "3 boys ambushed her, used racial slurs, and burned a cross. That's not a scuffle. That's a hate crime." Boyd's smile faded, replaced by a hard stare. "Now, let's not throw around terms like that. No one's seen any proof of this cross you're talking about. And as for the rest, well, kids exaggerate. Could have been a misunderstanding." Nathan slid his phone across the desk, showing photos of Amara's injuries, boot marks on her ribs, a swollen cheek, a split lip. "This isn't a misunderstanding," he said. Boyd barely glanced at the screen. Bruises could have come from anywhere. Maybe she got into a fight at school. I hear she's in that drama club, probably got carried away rehearsing or something. Nathan's hand tightened slightly, but his breathing remained steady, a discipline forged in combat zones. "Your son Ethan was there," he said quietly. Boyd's face flushed red, his chair scraping as he stood. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Johnson. You better have more than your girl's word before you start pointing fingers at my boy." Nathan didn't flinch. Amara identified him by his voice. She knows Mason Mellilin and Tucker Lattimore were with him. They didn't even try to hide who they were. Boyd loomed over his desk, using his size to intimidate. "You're in my town now, Johnson. You don't come into my office throwing around wild claims without evidence. You'll find yourself in a world of trouble." Nathan held his gaze, his stillness unnerving the sheriff. "Trouble's already here, Sheriff, and it's not going away." The air crackled with tension, but Nathan turned and walked out, leaving Boyd standing, fists clenched, his donut forgotten on the desk. Outside, the morning bustle continued, oblivious to the quiet war declared in that office. Nathan's next stop was the Mason County Courthouse, a white-columned building that loomed over the town square like a monument to old power. He climbed the marble steps to Judge Charles Malalin's chambers, ignoring the secretary's protests about needing an appointment. "He'll see me," Nathan said, brushing past her desk. Malalin looked up from a stack of case files, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the light. His office was pristine law books lined up like soldiers' degrees, framed in polished wood. "This is highly irregular," Malalin said, his southern drawl smooth, but edged with irritation. Nathan stood before the desk, his voice calm but unyielding. "What's irregular is your son Mason helping to assault my daughter." Malalin removed his glasses, folding them with deliberate care. "That's a bold claim, Mr. Johnson. I hope you have evidence to back it up." Nathan leaned forward slightly. "I have my daughter's word, her injuries, and a backpack full of ruined belongings. That's enough to start. But I'm not here for a trial. I'm here to give you a chance to make this right." Malalin's smile was patronizing. "Hearsay from a teenager doesn't hold up in my courtroom, and if you're implying some kind of threat—" "Not a threat," Nathan cut in. "A fact. Your son was part of a hate crime. You can act now, or I'll make sure the truth comes out another way." Malalin's face reddened, but he kept his composure. Get out of my chambers before I call security." Nathan turned and left the secretary watching him go with wide eyes. His final stop was Lattimore's Home and Hardware, a sprawling store at the edge of town, with a faded sign creaking in the breeze. The bell jingled as Nathan stepped inside, the smell of sawdust and motor oil filling the air. Carl Lattimore stood behind the counter, a stocky man with calloused hands and a permanent scowl. "We're closing early," he said without looking up. Nathan's boots echoed on the wooden floor. "This won't take long. I'm here about my daughter Amara. Your son Tucker was one of the boys who attacked her." Lattimore's head bumped up, his eyes narrowing. "You're that Johnson fella. Get out of my store." Nathan kept walking forward. "Tucker took part in beating my daughter and burning a cross. You get one chance to make this right." Lattimore's hand disappeared under the counter, likely reaching for a weapon. "You got no proof," he growled. "Come in here accusing my boy, you'll regret it." Nathan's voice stayed calm. "I don't need to accuse, I know. And soon everyone else will too." He turned and walked out, leaving Lattimore gripping whatever he'd reached for, his face pale with rage. Back at the hospital, Amara sat up in her bed, her bruises stark against the white sheets. Grace was by her side, reading from a worn Bible, her voice a soft comfort. Nathan entered quietly, his presence filling the room with a quiet strength. "How you holding up, sweetheart?" he asked, pulling a chair close. Amara managed a small smile. "Better now that you're here, Dad." She hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry I couldn't stop them." Nathan shook his head, his hand gentle on hers. "You did everything you could. You're stronger than you know." He glanced at Grace, who nodded slightly, a silent agreement passing between them. "I need you to tell me every detail," Nathan said. Amara recounted the attack again, her voice steadier this time. She described Ethan's smirk, Tucker's laugh, Mason's reluctance. "They took pictures," she added, "on their phones, laughing about it. I heard them say they'd post them, then delete them." Nathan's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone soft. "That's good, Amara. Every detail helps." He pulled out a small notebook, jotting down her words with precise strokes. Later that evening, Nathan stood by the creek where Amara had been attacked. The air was cool, the scorched patch of earth where the cross had burned still visible in the moonlight. He moved with the efficiency of a man who'd navigated war zones, his flashlight beam low and focused. Boot prints in the mud confirmed 3 attackers, their sizes matching teenage boys. He found cigarette butts, Marlboro Reds, the brand Tucker Lattimore was known to sneak behind the bleachers. Nathan bagged them carefully along with a scrap of torn cloth from one of their hoods. Tire tracks led to a nearby dirt road, suggesting a pickup truck, likely Tucker's. Each piece of evidence went into a plastic bag labeled and stored in his jacket. Back at his motel room, a sparse space with a flickering fluorescent light, Nathan laid out his findings on the bed. The cigarette butts, the cloth, the photos of Amara's injuries, and now a new tool, a small USB drive. He'd slipped into the town's only gas station earlier, charming the clerk into letting him check the security footage. It showed Ethan's truck speeding past the creek around the time of the attack. Nathan downloaded the clip, his face expressionless, but his mind racing. Amara, meanwhile, was finding her own strength. Grace had brought her a notebook from home, and she'd started writing down her thoughts, her fears, her anger. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," she wrote, her pen pressing hard into the paper. Nathan visited again that evening, bringing a small duffel bag. "We're going to start with the basics," he said, pulling out a pair of athletic shoes. "You're going to learn how to protect yourself." In the hospital's small courtyard, under the glow of a security light, Nathan taught her a basic stance, feet shoulder-width apart, knees bent weight balanced. Power comes from your core, he said, guiding her arms into a defensive position. Not your size. Amara mirrored him, her movements shaky but determined. For an hour they practiced simple blocks, Nathan's voice calm and precise. If someone grabs you, don't pull away, he said. Step into them, use their momentum. Amara nodded, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool night air. For the first time since the attack, she felt a spark of control, a sense that she could face the world again. Across town in a dimly lit barn on the outskirts of Masonville, 3 men gathered under a single hanging bulb. Sheriff Boyd paced a beer in his hand, while Judge Malalan sat on a hay bale, looking out of place in his tailored suit. Carl Lattimore leaned against a rusted tractor, his face hard with anger. This Johnson guy's trouble, Boyd said, his voice low. Military type. SEAL, from what I hear. Came into my office like he owned the place. Malalan adjusted his glasses. He was in my chambers too. Threatened to expose Mason. We need to handle this carefully. Lattimore snorted, cracking open another beer. Careful, he's one man. We run this town. My boy says the girl started it got mouthy. Maybe she needs another lesson. Boyd stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. We could make it look like an accident. My deputy can plant something in Johnson's car, drugs maybe. Pull him over, lock him up. Malalan shook his head. Too risky. He's not some drifter. He's got evidence, or he thinks he does. Lattimore's voice turned cold. Then we hit him where it hurts. His daughter. She walks that path every day. Tucker and the boys can remind her who's in charge. Unbeknownst to them, Nathan was crouched outside the barn, hidden in the shadows. A small parabolic microphone, a relic from his SEAL days, was aimed through a gap in the wooden slats. Every word, every threat, was captured on a digital recorder in his pocket. His face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened slightly when Lattimore mentioned Amara. He knew the type men like Lattimore mistook cruelty for strength, thinking their money and influence made them untouchable. Nathan waited until the men dispersed, their headlights fading into the night. Then he slipped inside the barn, his movements silent. On the wooden table where they'd sat, he placed a single item, a spent 9mm casing, military grade, polished to catch the light. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. A message that he'd heard everything, that he was watching, and that their time was running out. He melted back into the darkness, leaving the casing behind like a ghost's footprint. Back at the hospital, Amara finished her first self-defense lesson, her breath visible in the cool air. You did good, Nathan said, his voice warm with pride. You're stronger than they'll ever know. Amara looked up at him, her eyes fierce despite the bruises. I want to help Dad. I don't want to just hide. Nathan nodded, recognizing the fire in her. You will, he said. But first, you heal. And you learn. As they walked back to her room, Grace watched from the doorway, her Bible tucked under her arm. She saw the change in her daughter, the way Amara held herself a little taller, and she felt a flicker of hope. Nathan caught her eye, a silent vow passing between them. The men who hurt their daughter thought they held all the cards, but Nathan Johnson was playing a different game, one they couldn't begin to understand. The night settled over Masonville quiet, but charged like the calm before a storm that would change the town forever. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Johnson family's modest home, its white clapboard exterior glowing softly in the Mississippi heat. Amara stood in the backyard, her sneakers planted firmly on the grass, practicing the defensive stance her father had taught her. Feet shoulder-width apart, knees bent, hands up but relaxed. Nathan's voice echoed in her mind, guiding her movements. Her bruises were fading, but the ache in her ribs reminded her of the attack in the woods. She pushed through it, repeating the wrist escape technique Nathan had shown her: twist outward, step back, break free. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but she felt stronger with each repetition, as if she were reclaiming a piece of herself that had been stolen. Inside, Grace was at the kitchen table, sorting through a stack of papers, hospital reports, witness statements from neighbors, and a list of names of people who'd faced similar injustices in Masonville. She'd been up all night, fueled by coffee and determination, preparing to take their fight public. Nathan was out doing what he did best, moving unseen, gathering leverage, turning the town's secrets against its most powerful men. Amara paused her practice, catching her breath, and glanced at the house. She knew her parents were fighting for her, but she wanted to do more than just wait. She wanted to stand up to show Masonville she wasn't broken. The air shifted, a faint rustle from the back fence, catching her attention. Her heart quickened, but she stayed calm, remembering Nathan's words. Trust your instincts, but don't let fear control you. She moved silently toward the house, positioning herself near the back door, her eyes scanning the yard. 3 figures slipped through the gate, their movements clumsy but deliberate. Ethan Boyd, Mason Mlellan, and Tucker Lattimore, wearing black ski masks that did little to hide their identities. Amara recognized Ethan's lanky frame, Tucker's heavy footsteps, and Mason's nervous fidgeting. "Back for more." "Huh?" Tucker's voice was muffled but smug as he stepped forward, fists clenched. "Your daddy's not here to save you this time." Amara's pulse raced, but she planted her feet, her stance solid. "Get out of my yard," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear clawing at her chest. Ethan laughed, a cruel edge to it. "You don't learn, do you? This is our town." He lunged, aiming a wild punch at her shoulder. Amara moved like she'd practiced, stepping inside his swing and driving her elbow into his arm. The crack was sharp, followed by Ethan's yelp as he stumbled back, clutching his forearm. "You little," Tucker charged his size, making the ground shake, but Amara was ready. She sidestepped, using his momentum to shove him into the fence. The wood groaned under his weight, and he cursed, scrambling to his feet. Mason hesitated by the gate, his eyes wide behind his mask. "Come on, guys, this isn't—" "Shut up, Mason," Tucker snapped, pulling off his mask to glare at Amara. "You're done." He swung again, but Amara ducked, her training kicking in. She drove her knee into his stomach, and he doubled over, gasping. Mason finally moved, grabbing at her arm, but she twisted free just as Nathan had taught her, and pushed him back toward the gate. "Get out!" she shouted, her voice ringing with an authority that surprised even her. The boys froze, caught off guard by her defiance. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees, and the wail of sirens cut through the air. A neighbor, Mrs. Ellis, had seen the boys sneak in and called the police. 2 deputies burst into the yard, weapons drawn. "Hands up, everybody." Deputy Wilson, Sheriff Boyd's right-hand man, barked, his eyes narrowing as he recognized Amara. Ethan, still cradling his arm, played the victim immediately. "She attacked us," he cried, tears streaming down his face for effect. "We just came to talk and she went crazy." Tucker nodded, catching his breath. "Look at my face, she hit me." Mason stayed silent, his gaze fixed on the ground. Amara's heart sank as Wilson grabbed her wrists, twisting them behind her back and snapping on handcuffs. "That's not what happened," she said firmly, keeping her voice level. "They broke into my yard wearing masks." "Check the gate, it's damaged." Wilson ignored her, shoving her toward the patrol car. "3 witnesses say you started it, girl." "That's enough for me." The other deputy, a younger man named Martinez, hesitated, glancing at the gate where the latch hung loose. He said nothing, but his eyes lingered on Amara, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. The ride to the sheriff's station was a blur. Amara sat in the back of the patrol car, the cuffs biting into her wrists, watching through the window as paramedics arrived to tend to Ethan's arm. Tucker and Mason stood nearby, giving their statements, no doubt spinning the story Carl Lattimore had coached them to tell. At the station, the booking process was cold, and mechanical fingerprints mugshot her shoes and belt taken. The cell smelled of bleach and metal, its concrete walls closing in around her. She sat on the hard bench, her back against the wall, and focused on her breathing just as Nathan had taught her. Stay sharp. Stay ready. She wasn't afraid, not like before. She'd fought back, held her ground, and protected her home. But the weight of being in that cell, accused of something she didn't do, pressed down on her. She thought of her parents, of the way Grace had looked at her with fierce pride of Nathan's quiet strength. They'd come for her. She just had to wait. Outside Masonville was waking up to a different kind of morning. Grace Johnson stood in front of the town hall, her nurse's scrubs still on from her overnight shift. She held a megaphone, her voice steady as she addressed a growing crowd of residents, black, white, young, old, all drawn by the whispers of what had happened to Amara. My daughter was attacked not once but twice. Grace said her words carrying across the square. She defended herself, and now she's in a cell, while the boys who hurt her walk free. This isn't justice. This is Masonville protecting its own like it always has. Beside her stood Reverend Jackson, his gray hair catching the sunlight as he nodded in agreement. Mrs. Ellis, the neighbor who'd called the police, held a sign that read, "Justice for Amara." Other signs popped up in the crowd, "End the silence, no more hate." A local news van pulled up, its reporter scrambling to set up a camera. Grace handed out copies of the hospital reports, photos of Amara's injuries, and a list of past incidents, assaults, harassment, all swept under the rug by Sheriff Boyd and Judge Mullalen. "We're not asking for revenge," Grace said. "We're asking for accountability." Across town, Nathan was already moving. He'd spent the early morning hours slipping through Masonville's underbelly, collecting more evidence. A gas station clerk had given him another security tape showing Tucker's truck near the Johnson home just before the second attack. A janitor at the courthouse, tired of Mullalen's corruption, had slipped him a file detailing dismissed cases involving the sons of powerful men. Nathan's most damning find was a deleted social media post recovered through a contact in a tech firm showing Ethan Tucker and Mason posing with their masks from the first attack, the burning cross in the background. He'd sent copies of everything to a reporter at the state's biggest newspaper, along with the audio from the barn meeting. But Nathan wasn't done. He drove to Lattimore's home and hardware parking in the alley behind the store. The back door's lock was child's play for his lockpicks, and he was inside in under a minute. The store was dark, the shelves casting long shadows as he made his way to Carl Lattimore's office. Carl was there counting cash from the day's sales, his face set in a scowl. He looked up as Nathan stepped into the doorway, his hand reaching for the shotgun under his desk. "Don't," Nathan said, his voice low and calm. Carl froze, his eyes wide with recognition. "You're that Johnson bastard," he growled. "You sent those boys to my house," Nathan said, stepping closer. "You told them to hurt my daughter again." Carl's hand twitched, but Nathan was faster, disarming him with a single fluid motion. The shotgun clattered to the floor. "You think you're untouchable." Nathan continued, his voice steady but carrying a weight that made Carl's knees buckle. "You think your money, your name, your buddies in this town make you safe. You're wrong." He pulled out a manila envelope and dropped it on the desk. Inside were copies of the security footage, the social media post, and a transcript of the barn meeting. Carl's face paled as he flipped through the pages. "You've got one chance," Nathan said. Call off your dogs. Tell your son to confess. Or this goes to every news outlet in Mississippi by morning." Carl's hands shook, but his voice was defiant. "You can't scare me. This is my town." Nathan leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Carl's. "Your town's changing, Lattimore, and you're either part of that change or you're gone." He turned and walked out, leaving Carl staring at the evidence, his empire crumbling with each page. Outside, Nathan checked his watch. The protest at the town hall was gaining traction, and Grace's voice was now being broadcast live on the local news. He drove to a quiet spot overlooking the square, watching as more people joined the crowd. Teachers, shopkeepers, even a few of Sheriff Boyd's own deputies stood among them, their faces a mix of anger and shame. Nathan's phone buzzed a text from his contact at the newspaper. "Stories going live tonight. State police are opening an investigation." He allowed himself a small nod, the first sign of satisfaction he'd felt all day. Back at the sheriff's station, Amara sat in her cell, her mind replaying the fight in the yard. She'd held her own just like Nathan had taught her. The memory of Ethan's shocked face when she'd broken his arm gave her a quiet strength. She wasn't the scared girl in the woods anymore. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, and Deputy Martinez appeared, his keys jingling. "You're free to go," he said, avoiding her eyes as he unlocked the cell. Charges dropped. Amara stood, her movements deliberate. Why, she asked, though she suspected she knew. Martinez hesitated. "Your mom's out there with half the town." And other things came up. He didn't elaborate, but Amara saw the unease in his posture, the way his hand lingered on his holster. She walked out of the cell, her head high, and found Grace waiting in the station's lobby, tears in her eyes but a fierce pride in her smile. "You did it," baby Grace said, pulling her into a hug. "We all did." Outside, the crowd had grown, spilling onto the street. Reverend Jackson was speaking now, calling for unity and accountability. Amara joined her mother, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on her, some curious, some supportive, a few hostile. She didn't flinch. Nathan's car pulled up at the edge of the lot, and he stepped out, his face unreadable, but his eyes locked on his daughter. Amara met his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. She'd fought back, and now the community was fighting with her. The tide in Masonville was turning, not because of one man's strength, but because of a mother's courage, a daughter's resilience, and a town finally waking up to its own conscience. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the square in shades of purple and gold, Nathan slipped back into his car, his notebook open to a new page. The fight wasn't over, but the momentum had shifted. And in Masonville, that was a victory all its own. The morning sun rose over Masonville, its golden light filtering through the dusty windows of the community center's old gymnasium. Amara Johnson stood at the center of the hardwood floor, her sneakers squeaking slightly as she adjusted her stance. Her bruises had faded to faint yellow marks, but the strength in her posture was new, hard-earned through weeks of pain and perseverance. She wore a simple black t-shirt and athletic shorts, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Before her stood a small group of middle school kids, 6 boys and girls, all black. Their eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and nervousness. The gym smelled of polished wood and sweat, its walls echoing with the faint hum of a town waking up to change. Amara's voice was clear, carrying an authority she hadn't known she possessed. "First rule," she said, demonstrating a basic defensive stance, "is to stand tall. Feet apart, knees bent, like you're rooted to the ground. You're not here to fight. You're here to be ready." The kids mirrored her, some awkwardly, others with focus, their small bodies straightening as they followed her lead. Outside, the town was quieter than usual. The fallout from the past weeks had left Masonville reeling. Sheriff Darrell Boyd had resigned, his badge turned in after a state police investigation confirmed his role in covering up hate crimes. Judge Charles Millelan had announced an early retirement citing health concerns, though whispers in the diner suggested he'd left to avoid further scrutiny. Carl Lattimore's hardware store bore a for sale sign, its windows dark, and rumors said he'd moved to a neighboring county with his son Tucker, who hadn't been seen at school since the second attack on Amara. The state's newspaper had published a scathing exposé detailing years of corruption and bias in Masonville's justice system, fueled by Nathan's evidence, security footage, recovered social media posts, and the damning audio from the barn meeting. The article had sparked outrage not just in Masonville, but across Mississippi, prompting calls for reform and accountability. Amara's story, though anonymized to protect her privacy, had become a rallying cry, a symbol of a town forced to confront its past. Nathan Johnson leaned against the gym's back wall, half hidden in the shadows, watching his daughter with a quiet pride that softened his usually stern features. He wore a plain gray jacket, his hands in his pockets, the same calm readiness that had carried him through countless missions, now focused on Amara. She moved among the kids, correcting their stances with gentle precision. "Chin up, Marcus," she said to a lanky 12-year-old adjusting his shoulders. "You're not hiding. You're standing strong." Marcus nodded, his eyes bright with determination. Amara's lessons weren't just about self-defense. They were about reclaiming space, about refusing to shrink in a world that often demanded it. Nathan's mind drifted to the days after Amara's release from the sheriff's station. Grace had led the charge, organizing community meetings with Reverend Jackson and Mrs. Ellis, turning their protest into a movement. They'd pushed for new policies at the school board, demanded oversight of the sheriff's office, and secured funding for a youth program at the community center where Amara now stood, teaching kids who reminded her of her younger self. Amara's journey hadn't been easy. After the second attack, she'd spent nights writing in her notebook, pouring out her anger, fear, and hope. One entry, written under the dim glow of her bedroom lamp, had stayed with her: "I don't want to hate them. I want to be better than them." She'd shared those words with her mother, who'd encouraged her to turn them into something bigger. Amara had written an essay, "The Right to Stand," which she submitted to the local paper. The editor, a grizzled man named Mr. Thompson, had published it on the front page, calling it a voice Masonville needs to hear. The essay didn't name Ethan Mason or Tucker, but it detailed her experience with unflinching honesty, the fear of the attack, the betrayal of a town that protected her assailants, and the strength she found in fighting back, not with fists, but with courage and truth. The piece had gone viral, shared across social media, and Amara had received letters from kids as far away as Jackson, thanking her for speaking out. Now in the gym, Amara led the kids through a simple block, showing them how to deflect a grab without panicking. "It's not about being the strongest," she said, her voice steady. "It's about being smart, knowing you have the right to protect yourself." She caught Nathan's eye across the room and gave him a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of the lessons he'd given her. Nathan's heart swelled, but he kept his face neutral, not wanting to distract her. He thought back to his final confrontation with Carl Lattimore, the night he'd left the man zip-tied in his warehouse. Nathan hadn't raised a fist that time, not after the fight in the office. Instead, he'd sat across from Carl, the envelope of evidence between them, and spoken in a voice that brooked no argument. "Your son's future is in your hands," he'd said. "Confess, or this goes public." Carl had cursed and spat, but the weight of the evidence, photos, audio, witness statements had broken him. By morning, he'd called his lawyer, and Tucker had given a partial confession, enough to trigger the state's investigation. The other boys had followed suit, pressured by their father's crumbling empires. Ethan Boyd His arm still in a sling, had admitted to the first attack, claiming he'd been caught up in the moment. Mason Malilin, the quietest of the trio, had broken down in tears, apologizing in a written statement that his father had tried to suppress. Their confessions, combined with the community's outrage, had forced the town's leaders to act. The mayor, under pressure from the state, had appointed an interim sheriff, a woman from Jackson with no ties to Masonville's old guard. The school board had suspended the football coach who'd been overheard defending the boys and launched a diversity training program. Amara's essay had been read aloud at the board's emergency meeting, its words lingering in the air. Justice isn't revenge. It's making sure no one else has to feel what I felt. In the gym, Amara moved to a wrist escape drill, demonstrating how to twist free from a grab. "You don't pull away," she said, guiding a girl named Tasha through the motion. "You step in, use their strength against them." Tasha, a shy 11-year-old, smiled as she broke free, her confidence blooming. Amara remembered her own first lesson with Nathan, the way his calm instructions had steadied her shaking hands. She'd been terrified then, but now she felt a purpose she hadn't known before. Teaching these kids wasn't just about self-defense. It was about giving them what she'd found, the knowledge that they were enough, that they deserved to walk through Masonville or anywhere without fear. As the class continued, Amara shared a story, her voice soft but clear. "A few weeks ago, I was attacked," she said, pausing as the kids' eyes widened. "I was scared, but I learned something. Fear doesn't define you. What you do with it does. You're here to learn how to stand up not just for yourself, but for each other." Outside, Grace watched through the gym's open door, her nurse's scrubs replaced by a simple dress, her arms crossed, but her face glowing with pride. She'd spent the morning meeting with the mayor, presenting a petition for a community oversight board to monitor the sheriff's office. The petition had over 200 signatures, a testament to the town's shifting mood. Grace had always been the heart of their family, the one who held them together when Nathan was away on missions. Now she was Masonville's heart, two rallying neighbors who'd once stayed silent, convincing them that change was possible. She caught Nathan's eye across the gym, and a silent understanding passed between them. They'd fought this battle on different fronts, Grace with her words, and organizing Nathan with his evidence and quiet pressure. But they'd fought it together for Amara, and for every kid who'd ever felt unsafe in their own town. As the class wound down, Amara lined the kids up for a final drill, a simple bow to close the session. "This isn't about fighting," she said, her voice carrying to the back of the gym. "It's about knowing your worth, about standing together so no one feels alone." The kids bowed, their movements uneven but earnest, and Amara felt a warmth in her chest. She'd turned her pain into something bigger, something that could help others. Nathan stepped forward, breaking his silence. "You did good, Amara," he said, his voice low but warm. She smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "Thanks, Dad. I had a good teacher." The kids dispersed, chattering excitedly as they grabbed their backpacks. Tasha lingered, tugging at Amara's sleeve. "Can I come back next week?" she asked. Amara nodded. "Every week, Tasha. We're just getting started." That evening, the Johnson family sat in their living room, the windows open to let in the cool breeze. Amara read through her notebook, now filled with lesson plans for her self-defense class. Grace sipped tea, her petition papers neatly stacked on the coffee table. Nathan sat quietly, his small black notebook closed for the first time in weeks. The fight wasn't over. Change in Masonville would take years, maybe generations, but they'd struck a blow against the old ways. Amara looked up from her writing, her voice thoughtful. "I forgave them, you know," she said. "Ethan, Tucker, Mason. Not because they deserve it, but because I don't want to carry hate. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. They need to face what they did. Grace reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. That's wisdom, baby. Real strength. Nathan nodded, his eyes soft. You're teaching this town something it's never known, he said. How to stand up without tearing down. The lesson of Amara's story wasn't just in the confessions or the resignations, though those were victories. It was in the kids who now walked a little taller, in the neighbors who'd found their voices in the community center gym, where fear was being replaced with hope. Amara's class grew over the weeks, drawing kids from all corners of Masonville, black, white, Hispanic, each learning to stand strong together. The town wasn't perfect. Whispers of resentment still lingered in certain circles, and the old statue in the square still stood. But cracks had formed in Masonville's foundation of prejudice, and through those cracks, a new kind of justice was taking root. Not born of vengeance, but of truth, courage, and unity. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the living room, Amara closed her notebook and looked at her parents. "We're not done, are we?" she asked. Nathan's smile was small but certain. "Not by a long shot, sweetheart." And in that moment, they knew that whatever came next, they'd face it together as a family, as a community, as a force for change.